This session is SQL containers in 5 minutes and 5 lines of code. I've got about 3 different ways that I'm going to show you how to do these containers. So in about 15 minutes, we should all be done and we can just go and get coffee and move on to the next session if I do my job right. All right, we'll see. It really is simple. I've helped simplify things. I've also asked the engineers to make some little tweaks to make it even faster and easier for everyone, especially myself, so I don't have to remember as many lines of code. So we'll see how it works and see if it works for you guys. This is definitely, I want to be clear, I didn't know where to rate this session. It's really kind of a SQL on Docker 101 session. However, we're going to be building multiple containers. We're going to be doing a lot of different things. We're going to be using multiple different tools. We're going to be using, Azure Data Studio, PowerShell Notebooks. We're going to be using a Jupyter book. We're going to be using Bash. We're going to be using, obviously, SQL, right? And Docker. And if you've never used any of those, my assumption is that this will probably feel like a 300 level kind of thing because we're doing comparisons on code and how they run. But if you've ever done Docker before, then this is going to be a total 101 session for you probably. So I just want to go ahead and set that expectation out there right now that this is for people who haven't really gotten into SQL on Docker and are looking to be able to do it and also be able to do it repeatedly. That's the key for it. Is anyone in here already working with Docker at all? Good, only a couple of people. Great, perfect. All right. If you've never worked with Docker before, then this is a session for you. And everyone does work with SQL Server, right? Just making sure, because otherwise, otherwise this is not the session for you. Housekeeping slides. So place your phones on silence. Please make sure you know about everything that PASS has to offer, not just the summit here, local SQL Saturdays, 24 hours of PASS, Path marathons, and also the virtual groups. This entire session, I kid you not, is stolen from Andrew Prusky's PowerShell virtual group session that he did for us about 2 years ago. I just kind of reformatted and repackaged it and made it a little smoother. Not as detailed as what Andrew did. He did some extra stuff. Definitely recommend that it's up on the YouTube channel, go check that out. But that's what inspired me to get into containers was Andrew's session for the PowerShell virtual group. And I've been using it ever since. Literally, here I'll go into the bio slide. I'm a Microsoft employee and on my work laptop, I do not have SQL installed locally. I only have containers. Everything that I do is through SQL containers. And I blow them away and I bring them back up and I don't lose my data. And they're wonderful and I wish we would have had them 10 years ago. So some other info, my LinkedIn, Twitter, and also importantly, my GitHub SQL variant, SQL VARIANT, just like the data type except without the underscore. Again, especially for those of you who have just come in the room in the last couple minutes, everything I'm showing today is using the November release of Azure Data Studio. It has 2 very key features inside of there, Jupyter Books and PowerShell Notebooks. And if you don't have that release, you're not going to be able to follow along with what I'm doing. I posted the code that I'm using today up into a GitHub repo inside of what should work out as a Jupyter book, but I'm literally going to have to take someone's laptop after this session and make sure that it works the same on your machine as it does on mine, but I think I got it right. So if you just go to github.com/SQL variant, I have a repo out there called demos, and you'll find one out there called PASS Docker, and then you just clone that entire folder, copy it down however you want, and then you open it as a folder, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And it's all notebooks or Jupyter books. It's all Jupyter from here is what it really is. So how many of you are already working with Jupyter books or Jupyter notebooks? 1, 2, 3, no, just a handful. All right. So they're awesome. I love them. I use them all the time. And I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I do. So let me exit out of there. And see if I can don't have a screen in front of me this time, so I will duplicate. Okay, go through. And let's start at the beginning. So hopefully, again, Azure Data Studio, you can go to aka.ms/get Azure Data Studio, and you'll be able to find the download for it right there. On GitHub, so again, my ID on GitHub is SQL variant. As soon as you get there, there's this demos right here at the very top. Just click on that. That'll take you to the repo where I've got all the code for today. So just dive under presentations, and I'll put a nice README on here afterwards. But this entire folder, you want to clone that all down to your local machine. And then once you do, you actually open this as a folder inside of Azure Data Studio, and that will allow you to be able to pull in everything as a Jupyter book. So let me step you through that real quick. So if we go in here, let's collapse this for a second. So you come in here to Azure Data Studio, open folder. This is the key thing that they had to explain to me that was the difference. I was a little dense on it. You point it to the correct spot, and then you say select folder. I'm not going to do it because I've already got it open and I don't want to mess anything up for the demo, but you say select folder and it'll open it. And once you do, you should get a nice Jupyter book navigation right over here on the left-hand side. And here's, to be clear, this is in the upper left. Right here, let me actually make that a little bigger. This is the Jupyter book icon. And once you have that open, you've got your Jupyter book here. It's got markdown cells, gives you a little help navigating what we're going to do, installing the Docker desktop in case you don't already have it, creating your containers, working with sample databases, removing them, automation, and some common stuff that we may or may not need. And I will continue to clean this up a little more as after the session and post some more updates to the repo. I've been basically unable to really push everything out publicly until this week, until everyone could get to it. So hopefully most of this should all work pretty easily. How many people are already working with Azure Data Studio? Let me start with that. Okay, right. You can do everything that I'm showing you today without using Azure Data Studio. But if you're a SQL person, I think it's the most ideal place to do it. And part of the reason I came to that conclusion was I wrote an article earlier this year, very similarly titled, How You Can Build These Containers with 5 Lines of Code. And when I first did it, I was doing it in the ISE, and I was looking at SSMS and working with Docker. And then as I was watching other people do it, I realized, well, they do it in VS Code at the time. And then I realized, wait a minute, I think we can just do all this in Azure Data Studio. Why isn't anyone doing it that way? So I played around, and about the only thing that we really needed to do extra once I got done was need to, if you want to be exactly like my demo, which you don't have to be, just go download the Docker extension from VS Code as a flat file, and then import it into Azure Data Studio because they don't have it in the marketplace. And then outside of that, everything's already built in and ready to go into Azure Data Studio. If you are using the PowerShell Notebooks, there's going to be a couple extra steps. We could do these as just .ps1 files if you wanted to, but I thought being able to use the PowerShell Notebooks and being able to put the documentation in line right next to everything as you're going through it would be a lot easier to navigate. So let me pull one of those up right now. And how many of you work with PowerShell? Hopefully everyone. Dang near everyone. Yes, that's great. And if you don't work with PowerShell, remember those 5 lines of code that I mentioned in the title of this session? They're all PowerShell, so disclaimer. All right. I put this together so it could walk you through even just installing Docker Desktop for you. And part of the thought of this was, well, once you have this mastered, what if you want to give it to one of your coworkers and you want them to do it and they don't have Docker Desktop installed? So I went ahead and included those instructions as well. I'm installing Docker Desktop using Chocolatey because I'm really a big fan of automation and I don't want to have to go download a link and sit there while the installer goes through. So I use Chocolatey. And if you're not using Chocolatey, I even put in the command for how you can set up Chocolatey in just a single line of code. Piece of warning here that this is going to download a script from the internet from the chocolatey.org site, and that will do the that script that's out there will do the installation. So fair warning, take a look at that script. It's downloading things off the internet. You should know what you're doing, kind of stuff. But once you run that, then you've got Chocolatey, and then you can run this single line to install Docker Desktop, and then you're ready to go. And all the way to the first demo, you'll be able to run through that, no problem. That's all you needed. There's another one in here for configuring the desktop. I'm gonna have to find another machine where I haven't done this yet and take another screenshot to add it to here. But this next page is simply so that when you're working with these containers, initially, by default, everything's gonna be contained inside of them. So if you create a database or you restore a database to it, the database is going to exist inside the container. That can work in many scenarios, but in a lot of scenarios that I work with, I'm a little OCD. I want my data files somewhere else. I don't want it inside the container. And I also want to be able to blow away the container, have my data files somewhere else, spin up a brand new container, attach to those old data files, and be right back online. That's what I want. That's my preference. Other people have different patterns, different automation strategies. I'm not trying to push you to that, but if you're interested in that, that's where configuring your machine so that it can access your local drives so that you can store them separately is beneficial. And then we can move on down to the very first part. So prerequisites here are that you're gonna have to have Azure Data Studio installed. We just showed you how to do Docker Desktop and do that with Chocolatey, pretty easy. You're gonna need the SQL Server module to be able to restore these databases quickly. You can install that from the PowerShell gallery and then just import it into your session. I've added some additional stuff in here for downloading the AdventureWorks database just to be able to, see an actual database inside of there and see what the mechanics are. Because I figure if you're gonna do this for your dev environment, you're probably gonna, spin up the container and now I need to restore one of my databases or maybe 5 of my databases to this container and then start playing with it. And then you gotta figure out permissions and then all those kind of things and to automate afterwards. This session focuses on just the mechanics of getting things restored and getting connected to that container and letting you see what it looks like so that you can kind of get a warm fuzzy, get your head around it. So if anyone is wanting to play along while doing this, again, November release of Azure Data Studio, then you can pull down this Docker plugin as well. You don't have to have that. And then the other thing is go into the repo and just grabbing, and I'll just make this a little bigger, the Docker presentation and then opening that as a file. All right, everyone ready? See how fast this is? See if we can get all this done in under 5 minutes, right? All right, so here, I've been playing around with this stuff all morning long. Rebuild, found a couple working demos. I won't go into those obviously, but everything's working. I'm gonna blow away everything I've done and I'm gonna start over and we should be done with at least the first container in under 5 minutes and maybe even the second. So a couple options here with the navigation. I can come in here and do it through the GUI and just say, I can do stop container, and then I can remove container. I can go directly to remove container if I want to, or I can be graceful about it, shut them down. And obviously for this, it doesn't really matter so much. But here, now I have blown away every single one of my containers, and this had better work because I don't even have the working set of demos behind me. So let's see if we can get this running. All right. So here I am. I'm going to run one of the demos, and this one's the first one, the one with internal storage. About these PowerShell notebooks, and how many of you have worked with SQL notebooks at all? Just in case, yeah, okay. So a few of you are gonna be familiar with, once you run a command, you've got the output of it saved, and you can save that to the file and you can share it with someone, and then they see what the output is supposed to look like. That's kind of what's going on here. I've gone ahead and already downloaded this backup file. We can go ahead and run it again, and it'll go ahead and re-download that. I should have thought about that because we're on conference Wi-Fi and I hadn't actually checked that, but oh, slight detail. All right, that should work. For this one, I'm gonna create a directory on my local machine in case I want to pull things in from here. I step through, obviously just make a directory, and then I'm going to go ahead and create this. Let me make a little more real estate on the screen. So I'm going to say Docker run. Sorry, I don't know why it's trying to navigate there. Hold on, let's see if we can get back to that. So I'm going to say Docker run. I'm going to give it a port so that I can map back to 1433 because on my local machine, I'm going to say connect, and I'm going to give it a machine name, and I'm going to go directly to 1433. And what this is going to do is it's going to automatically behind those scenes remap it to a different port. And this is outside of remembering what the port number is and configuring it here, this is really all I need to do. You have to set up your SA password inside of here when you're creating it. You can do that through a credential. You've got different options for that. You can give it a name. You don't actually have to give it a name, funny enough. But then the last thing is you just tell it where the container registry is that you want to pull this image from. And so if you go to mcr.microsoft.com/msql/server:2019-latest, that will go ahead and pull down SQL Server 2019 in an Ubuntu container for you right away. And I already did that once this morning. And that is the one part I did not have the guts to try and delete is my images because of conference Wi-Fi. So I'll go ahead and I'll run that now. What it's going to do is it's going to take a look and it's going to say, hey, I've already downloaded this image once before. It's going to go find it somewhere in this mass of different images I've downloaded this year. And then it is going to spin up my container once it's got the image downloaded, and it will go ahead and respond back with a GUID telling me that it's done. Come on now, don't let me down. Figures, all right. Let me just stop and start that one. And I just realized I opened it up in the insiders. So if this doesn't work, I'll switch back over to the regular one. No, it shouldn't run that at all. But the other thing I can do is I can just bring up the terminal and I can run this here. In just a moment when that finishes loading up. There it goes. There it goes. That's what should have happened. And I don't know why I didn't just immediately gracefully do that. I just realized as I was standing here, looking here, trying to figure out what was going on, I'm on the insiders build, and the insiders build goes out every day. And for all I know, they broke something yesterday, and earlier this morning when I was doing everything, I was in the non-insiders, the regular distribution build. So that might be the difference there. So we'll see here in a minute as we go on to more. So I've got my container up and running. Let me go back to that. There we go. Give this another minute to pull this back up. I've got my container up and running. I can verify that by running this command, docker ps. And I've also got the little plug-in here that makes it very obvious that I've got my container up and running. And now what I can do is I can go ahead and start checking SQL and see if I can connect to it. So let's do this. So what I'm doing here is inside of these, there it goes. Inside of these notebooks, when I save a variable, I can then reuse it in a subsequent cell. So instead of having to sit here and try and type my password perfectly over and over and over again while you guys are watching, I want to type it once, maybe get it right, and then reuse that credential object with each subsequent execution. So let me see if that one worked. There we go. All right. So now, can you all read that okay? Someone having difficulty in the back reading it? So I've got my instance up and running. It's got Ubuntu, version 15, Linux, SQL Server, everything as promised. The next thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and run the get SQL database command. And let me just make it a little easier. And as you can see here, I've just got my master, my model, MSDB, and tempdb databases. Nothing's on there just yet. Nothing's been added. So I'll go on to the next part. I downloaded that AdventureWorks database earlier. I go ahead and run this, and that will move it over to the correct location. Ooh, looks like it didn't download. Hold on, let me go back up. Just before this. Should have thought about that really hard before I went and wiped out that copy of it. So, let me just do it from the terminal just to be safe. I'll switch over here to, oh, there it goes. Oh, it says the file's in use. Oops. Well, maybe it's already trying to download it. We'll see here in a second. I should already have a copy of it though. So let me see, C, and SQL data, Docker, Devo1, and AdventureWorks 2016 back. Okay, so the file's there. Sorry for the jerkiness there. I wanted to make that one right after the other. But, okay, so file's in the correct location. We can then use a Docker command to copy it to the Docker container and allow it to be presented inside of there. So this is giving me an error. I'm not 100% sure that it's right, but we'll just go ahead and run it inside of here. Processing. No, it's this. It gives it the full path there. Should be doing test container, home downloads. Actually, so let me just change it to the directory that I was working from a second ago, which was C. / Docker / and what was that one? Actually, I guess I should have just copied that. There we go, found the file. Let's see if it does it that time. No. It looks like it must be a bad file. Uh-oh. Shouldn't delete it. Hold on one second. Go to one more file. I'm sorry, what? Run it one more time. Here, you're thinking? Let's see. Hey, that did seem to work. Let's try. All right. Yeah, that we seem to have picked up some kind of a regression there on that one. So let's see. So what I did now is I opened up the terminal and I'm actually entering bash inside of the container, and I'm going to check and see if that file actually made it inside of the container into the location. And yep, there it is. Yep. So it's probably a little bit hard to see, but the file did get copied. So apologies for it not being more obvious that first time. We definitely need to get that bug fixed, but we should now be able to be in a spot where we can go ahead and restore this database. And same thing. Create file. All right, looks like that finished. And if I'm right, then this is from a previous run, so I'll just clear that result. And I'll run get SQL database again. Yep. There we go. And now we've got our AdventureWorks database right there. And if you're not a PowerShell person and you're like, I want to see it for myself, I don't believe you, totally fine. We can just go over here to test container 01 and we make our connection inside of there. And we can fire up a new query. And then I don't even know what the tables are inside of AdventureWorks, but we can do, what are there? A human. Yep, that's one of them. Employee, department history, run, boom, we've got our data. So there. So we're able to get our data get our database restored into our container and accessible, all within a couple sequential lines of execution. One of the very cool things about these, and why I've kind of reformatted these a little bit and broken them out into different steps, like setting up, let me bring this up a little bit here, setting it up using the internal storage. Once you have it to a spot where you're doing the steps that you want and it just, boom, it creates your container for you and it restores your databases and maybe applies some permissions or something like that. Once you have that exactly where you want, you can actually come and hit this button up top and run everything all at once so that you don't have to go through there command by command. You can just run the entire notebook all at once and it just spins up your container for you. And then it gives you a response at the end letting you know, hey, it all worked, or you got an error, and you're ready to go. So if you want to be able to take down a new copy of a dev database or reset your QA database and then reapply your change deployment scripts, you're able to do that. And it's only, maybe put one notebook together that just wipes out the existing database, one notebook that takes care of spinning up the container and restoring the database and applying the permissions, and then another one that's another notebook that is applying your change change scripts or whatever you have that you want to test out. Is everyone following along? Oh, go ahead. So the question is, that's what I'm saying applies to us individual notebook within a Jupyter book. Yes, absolutely. We have a command, currently a commandlet. So in the SQL Server module, there is a commandlet called Invoke SQL Notebook. Doesn't do PowerShell yet. They just got it out back in September. But it'll take one of these T-SQL notebooks, and let's say you had your, changing your schema and all that kind of stuff inside of the notebook. You could run the notebook, and it would run the command Invoke SQL Notebook, give the location of that notebook file, and it would run everything inside of there for you, and then give you all your responses back, all your results back, and it would give it back to you with your original. So you had your script that you executed and the results that you received back from it. It's a great question, yes. I don't know about automating anything beyond one notebook at a time. I'm still trying to get that consistent and nice for myself, so, but that's where we're at today. Yeah, question? Is this feature available for Azure SQL? So yeah, you can do containers inside of Azure SQL, up in Azure, not in Azure SQL, I should say. Up in Azure, you can do containers. I played around with that there as well, but I didn't want to do that because of conference Wi-Fi and other reasons. But honestly, as I said, this is what I do on my local machine every day. If I'm working with the database, I'm using a container. I do not locally install. So it's what I do all the time. And I also save my credentials in there to make it a little easier, and some other things like that that I can go into. But this is precisely what I do. Yep, more question, go with you.
So you said that you can put outside containers. Is it possible?
Yep.
You always have to bring the database into the container?
No, that's the next one. Great question. So the question is, do you always have to bring the database inside of the container? No. If you're comfortable with that, great. Do it. Love it. I actually don't love it. It actually gives me the heebie-jeebies to think that the database is inside that container. I am more of a physical person, and that's why the next demo is here. I've got all these backup files, all these data files, all these log files. I've got them sitting on the hard drive of my local machine, because if that container dies or I just can't get it working, I want those data files, and I don't want to have to go rummaging and connecting and extracting and then sweating as I'm like, oh my God, am I going to get the data file out, right? I'm not there on the Linux side that I've got that level of proficiency that I feel like I'm just going to be able to dive right in and take care of that on a moment's notice. So that's why I leave them out on my local machine, which is actually the next demo that we'll go through. More questions before we move on to that though? Yep. What edition? So these, I believe, they're running either Enterprise or Developer Edition. There's an option inside of there where you can set the edition as you're building it. I did not add that to this session, but I know that there's an option out there where you can go ahead and set the edition of SQL Server. Express, I don't know about Express. Yeah, and I would, yeah, I don't know. I can look though. All right. Any more questions before I move on to the external storage demo? Yep. A little louder, please. How do I access it from Azure SQL? Up there. Then you connect via SSH, and you can manipulate your files that way. Does that answer your question? I don't do it as much in Azure SQL. I do it mostly local. I do it only sometimes when I've got to reproduce something. You can do this in 2017, 2019, yeah, absolutely, either one. As far as I know, it's only 2017 and 2019 that they have images for. All right, any last question before the external demo? All right, great. So as I was saying, I'm still not there quite trusting the containers enough to actually allow the data files to sit inside there. Maybe one day, but not yet, not for me. So far we've got just one container. Hold on 1 second, I got a call. All right, so just one container. I'm gonna go ahead and create a second one. In this case, I've already gone ahead and created the directory. And I've actually copied the file over, and since we got that last error, I'm gonna skip over the step of copying AdventureWorks when we get to it. But we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna give it a different port number. We're gonna give it, actually in this one, I don't know if I even bother giving this one a name. Yeah, I do, okay. So I give it a different name, but the main difference here is this one little piece of code right here where I mount a volume, and I'm telling it, when I create this one, I want the Docker container to know that there is a volume called SQL Server, and that I'm going to map that over to this directory on my local machine. So my C, SQL data, Docker, Devo2, that's where I'm going to store my backup files. That's where I'm going to have my MDFs and my LDF files. And I want to be able to access that by simply saying /SQL Server, and I don't want to have to do any other magic to be able to navigate to it. Outside of that, everything else is the same as the previous one. Again, just port numbers and that one volume, and obviously the name. And that's the only differences. And hopefully this will work on first try. Hey, there we go. That's the way it was supposed to work on the last one. All right, I told you I could do it. So there it is, up 1 second. We've got our new container, right? And then we can verify that it is, verify that it doesn't have any databases to it. Looks like it has. I think what's happening is it thinks it's running the command and then it gets lost. There it goes. So there we've got our list of databases. And then I can copy the item. I already took a look and saw that it's there. AdventureWorks 2016 back file. So I'm going to skip this one since I am having a little bit of glitchiness, but then I'll just move on to this restore SQL database. And I want to call out this one right here, this auto relocate file. This auto relocate file is going to allow me to not have to do all the gobbledygook of telling it, you know, put the data file over here, put the log file over here. It's going to take my default data and log file locations, and it's going to relocate those files over there for me from the backup, just like it does in SSMS. So this is again through the restore SQL database commandlet in the SQL Server module. So all I have to do is run that. I'm going to reuse that same credential object that we established in the previous cell when we went and checked and saw that there were no databases other than just the system databases. And then I can verify it again here. I can see that. And again, if you want to like really see it, we can come in here, connect to that container. AdventureWorks database is right there. And here's all its tables, and we can query from it. So then you can keep on going on and obviously download more databases, restore them, and then after them, one of the beautiful things of this Jupyter book here is, let's say you've got, kind of going back to his question of like, all right, you execute everything inside of the notebook. So I've got my container back. I've got my database back. Okay, now I've got to go maybe apply permissions or something, or I've got to clean something up as soon as it gets back. Maybe there's something in, maybe I'm doing a restore from production that's been cleansed and there's no user permissions that are going to work down here in like dev or QA, and I need to go set those up. What I can do is I can go ahead and do a new T-SQL notebook if I need, add those steps, make it the next step in the process, and then just kind of move on to that. Questions? Yep.
So when you logged in one volume, you add additional volumes?
Sure, yeah. The question is, I've added one volume, can I add multiple volumes? Yes, you can not only add multiple volumes, but you can also add a completely separate container and then house all of your files inside that separate container. And here's why you might want to think about doing that. The container for the files, very simple. I'm less afraid of that one, right? Even I'll try that one. And I can stick the data files in there and the log files in there. But the SQL Server is in a completely separate container. And if something goes wrong with it, I blow it away, I bring it back up, create a new one, looks just like it, and then I just attach those databases from the container, and then I'm ready to go. I don't even have to run through the restore process at that point. I just attach them, right? So that's another option that you have there. I tried to get that working for this demo, but with everything else going on with the Jupyter books and the PowerShell notebooks, I was mismapping my file. So I will get that working, and it will be part of this Jupyter book that'll be posted on the repo, so you'll be able to play with that, just not today, maybe late next week. So you had a question? Can you? Mount to network share. I would assume that you should be able to. I've never tried it myself, but I can't imagine why you wouldn't be able to mount a network share. It would be one of the first things I would do if I were doing it for sharing with my coworkers kind of things. There's another way of doing this as well that takes us another step further, which is a Docker file, which is basically taking all these steps, putting it into a single file and allowing it, so it's basically a recipe for your container. And then you just give it the name of the Docker file, and then you spin up the container based on that Docker file. That's another way to do it. If you're a container person, you're probably like, man, why would you ever even use the PowerShell Notebook? Just use the Docker file. I get it. But if you're new to containers, like I'm still kind of new to containers, it's easier for me to see it right there in line. But the Docker file could definitely be an easy way to do some of the automation steps. Yep. Can you mount? Yeah, you can mount more than one, absolutely. I would get, so the question is, you're saying with a single container, then give them all their own separate database? Oh, the same database? I would have to use one of the like clone type products to be able to, I can't do it. Maybe someone like Andrew Prusky or Anthony Nocentino, who know a lot more about containers or Bob Ward than I do. Maybe they can do something like that. But I just do the basic, get it up and running for my local testing and stuff like that. Yeah. More questions? You guys are so quiet. Is it because it's morning? It's Friday. It's the last day. We're going to bug out after this. Let's go on to destroying the containers real quick, just so we cover that. Again, you can use the docker stop command like I did earlier and just say, in this case, docker stop test container 01. That just turns it off. So like if you want to like turn it off for the day and then turn it back on in the morning, docker start fires it up the next day. If you want to completely get rid of it so that you can rebuild it, docker rm right here, and then give it the name of the container, close it away, everything's gone, start over again from scratch, and away you go. Yep.
Can you exchange containers once you build them, shut them down, copy the file to somebody else?
Yeah, so the question, sure. The question is, can you exchange them? And basically he's asking, can I build one and then give it to someone else? So if I were gonna build one, I'd probably wanna do it from a build server kind of thing. And I'd probably use a Docker file to build that thing automatically. And then I could push it out. Yes, I can do that. There's also the ability to just create an image instead. And so just like we're pulling down the SQL 2019 image, you could have your own image that pulls down SQL 2019, restores some databases, and does some other things via Docker file, package that all back up, puts it up on the registry, and then they just download that image, and then they have everything, instead of having to manage that whole process over again. So that way, they're just then doing that one single line of start a container, and everything's available to them. Great question. More questions? Yes, ma'am. What's monitoring my containers after I've got them up and running? So for monitoring of containers, I mean, for this particular thing, I'm just doing everything here locally. If I were wanting to use a monitoring product, this is SQL Server. It's just like any of the monitoring products can plug in there. As far as like maybe space usage and things like that, I don't have any tooling set up for that. There is some container diagnostics information you can get from the container. So for example, believe if we do, let me do exit out of here. If we do Docker PS-S, for example. Yeah, there we go. Let me pull this down. Just try it. Here we go. So, oh, I thought that was gonna, oh, there it is. See right here? This is telling me what the size of my footprint is for that container. So I can keep track of how large these things are getting. And again, these are how much is being consumed inside of the container versus how much, if you're using external storage, none of that is gonna count. And then if you're using a separate container for the data files and log files, then obviously you need to add up both the sizes of those containers to really get a true number for you. Yep, Kenneth?
So, two questions, kind of related. Where it says 356 meg, that's the actual footprint on the hard drive.
The question is 356 meg is the actual footprint on the hard drive. No, so the 356 would be, yes, sorry. Yes, the virtual. The virtual expanded, yeah. There's a lot of deduplication. So the fact that I built two containers, before Kenneth goes on to his next question, I didn't re-download the entire copy of SQL 2019, and I didn't completely duplicate everything for the second container. It relied on the fact that I already had it there and that I don't need to modify any of those files. And I have essentially just mapped back to it, but I'm not recopying all that. That's why I was able to spin it up in a couple seconds instead of having to wait here for a minute while it reduplicates everything about the operating system and SQL Server and all of that. I'm able to reuse that because none of that stuff is changing, and I'm just doing a couple additions to it. So yeah.
So I've got an older laptop, limited space. How much space would you say it's going to take to go from, I don't have any of this installed, to being able to run?
All right, so the question is, how much will this take up if you start from nothing and put SQL 2019? I would say less than 10 gigs is what you're gonna, well less than 10 gigs, maybe even 5 gigs, to at least get 1 or 2 containers up and running. Absolutely. Next question.
So if you want to control number of CPUs, RAM, and so forth, for your SQL instances, you set the building the container first.
Correct. The question is,
My presumption is I don't know what the CPU cores are.
right, so the question is about the hardware specifications. If I want to specify how much RAM it's taking up, how much CPU, that kind of things, you do those at the creation time. Those are definitely the kinds of things that you would probably put inside of a Docker file so that you make sure you do those exact same settings over and over again each time you rebuild, and for each copy that you make of it. And yeah, you'd specify them there.
Is there a way to see what they're running at right now?
Is there a way to see what they're running at right now? I'm not familiar with all Docker commands off the top of my head, but let's see, that one does this, the port. Yeah. Yep. And if you're running on Windows, it's actually behind the scenes Docker's relying on Hyper-V to be able to present all this to you. So if you go into Hyper-V Manager, you'll see that there's a container or a VM out there called Docker that's managing all this for you. Yep. Question? On Windows, if you're running on Windows, Docker, it's layer to get from Docker all the way down to the hardware is going to be, its interface is going to be Hyper-V. Yeah. Shouldn't. So I believe you can just fire them up as using VMware, but I don't have VMware, so I can't try it. Yeah. Necessary virtualization right there. Yep. Right. Yeah. All right. More questions or other use cases that you're trying to? No, you just need, as far as I know, you just need Windows 10. That's what I know that you have to have. It has to be Windows 10. So, more questions?
Not really a question, more of a comment, because in another talk I saw them use PowerPoint instead of like your SQL.
Right.
They actually did bear on MS SQL, so even the system databases would be put
Right.
outside, which made it replace upgrade from 2017 to 2019, just we tore down one container, brought up another container, and we went
Sure. Totally possible.
to
Yep. Totally possible. You can map all the databases outside if you want. For me, if I blow away the container, I want those databases, and I actually want MSDB and all the job history. I want that to disappear as well. So for my case, that's what I want to happen. And so that's the way I particularly build this. Hopefully I'm hoping to get more people realizing how easy these are to use and start using them on a regular basis, because there are some days where I will have, I kid you not, 15 different containers that I've used. So I can isolate something that I'm trying to track down. And then at the end of the day, well, no, I don't. I tend to close my laptop and go home. But the next day, when I open up my laptop, I go, good Lord, why are there 20 containers? And I just start hitting delete, and they're gone. And I'm ready to go and start everything afresh. And I don't have any, I don't have anything sitting there bogging me down from the previous stuff that I tested with. Yep, question.
I know nothing about it. But if I wanted to go through that, the goal would be to create a test environment for production.
Yep.
And so you said that if you create the first container, you get your in terms of the footprint on the disk and the second and third or whatever. Leverage that.
Correct.
So is that basically like a database snapshot?
So the containers, what they're doing is, they're doing like a snapshot of the data, the container information that's being presented, and presenting a snapshot of it.
Microsoft SQL Server snapshot.
So it's in this case, it's going to be Docker is what's presenting. Right. Absolutely. Some last couple things, just to make sure everyone gets them, and I'll bring this up one more time. Again, this is the November release of Azure Data Studio. Apparently don't do the insiders build today. I would, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Azure Data Studio to be able to get up and running. The demo's already posted in GitHub in my demos repo. So that you've got that information there. And again, I did 2 articles for MS SQL Tips earlier this year on these 2 scenarios where we've done internal storage and external storage. And things are actually easier than back when I wrote these articles, which was back in April. So things are even easier now today. Back then they didn't have the auto relocate file switch on the commandlet, and it wasn't quite as smooth. So it's actually even easier if you want to get up and running with them today. More questions? Is anyone inspired and they're actually going to use this? Yeah, good number. Is anyone like, nah, this turned out not to be a good idea after all? No. Active Directory integration, that's on. I've been waiting to get through Past Summit and Ignite before I touch that ever again. That's my next thing that I plan on figuring out properly. I don't know how to do it myself, but ask Anthony Nocentino, he'd probably be able to tell you great information on that. So real quick on these notebooks, if you want to play around with the PowerShell notebooks, what you need to do is go ahead and open up a new notebook, hit Manage, and you need to search for the PowerShell kernel. Search for that, install it. I already have it, so I won't hit that button. And you also have to have Python running on your machine. Please do not attempt to use Python 2. it's not going to end well, all right? Python 3 and above to be able to get this to work. Nearly everything that I'm showing you today will also work on Mac OS or Linux. I just don't own any of those devices, so I can't really test them on a regular basis the way I can with Windows. If I did, I would actually. The article I wrote earlier this year, if you look through the screenshots, you'll see I borrowed my dad's MacBook to go ahead and run through all of that. And it was pretty easy to get figured out. So it does work cross-plat. Any last questions? Yep.
Just expand on PowerShell there, but if I do spin up these containers with the production database, and then the sizes, what they on the list will be small, right? So that second and third.
If you're making a identical copy of it, yes. Yes.
And then that, they start deviating from each other.
You would see the differences as they're growing, yes. But if you're doing it externally, then you've then hydrated the whole one, the entire database. Does that make sense? If you're using the external storage model. If you're using the internal storage model, then yes, it's going to dedupe. But otherwise, yeah. Right. All right. Well, everyone, thank you very so much for coming out. I hope you guys give this a try, and hope you enjoy the rest of your summit. And thank you very much.